This is BBC News. Now, more on that breaking news that President Biden has ordered an object to be shot down by fighter jets over Alaska. A high-altitude object, we're told, was shot down in the past hour. Well, the White House said the object was the size of a small car and was over a sparsely populated area at the time. It comes after the US shot down a Chinese balloon over its territorial waters last Saturday. Well, White House spokesman John Kirby gave these details in the last few minutes.
We're calling this an object because that's the best description we have right now. We do not know who owns it, whether it's state-owned or corporate-owned or privately owned. We just don't know. We don't know. As I said, state-owned. We don't know if it's state-owned, and we don't understand the full purpose. We don't have any information that would confirm a stated purpose for this object. We do expect to be able to recover the debris since it fell not only within our territorial space, but on what we believe is frozen water. So a recovery effort will be made, and we're hopeful that it'll be successful, and then we can learn a little bit more about it.
Was its appearance like the Chinese aircraft?
No, it was much smaller than the spy balloon that we took down last Saturday. The way it was described to me was roughly the size of a small car, as opposed to a payload that was like 2 or 3 buses size, right? So much smaller, and not of the same, no significant payload, if you will.
Let's get more now from our correspondent Nomia Iqbal, who's in Washington. Nomia, not a huge amount of details, but how would you assess the level of concern in the White House?
It's really interesting. So I was inside that presser. So the White House gives daily briefings that we, as the press, attend. And today, on top of the agenda, they were expected to talk about the ongoing war in Ukraine, also the assistance that the US is giving to Turkey, and the visit of Brazil's President Lula. He's meeting President Biden for the first time since they both took office. So that was top of the agenda. And so we were inside. And John Kirby, who we heard from there, then revealed in the last hour or so about 1:30 Eastern time, that this object, high-altitude object, was shot down. So, of course, the presser was entirely dominated by this specific story. And so just to recap some of the things that Mr. Kirby said, it was 40,000 feet high. It was a high-altitude object, and they said it posed a threat to civilian aircraft. So that's why President Biden ordered for it to be shot down, and he emphasised that President Biden ordered for that to happen. It fell over frozen water, and actually just right now there is another presser taking place by the Pentagon, and they're giving more information. They're saying that there's been significant debris that they've recovered so far, but they have to analyse it. And as we heard there in that clip from Mr. Kirby, they are emphasising that it's not a balloon. Well, I mean, they're not saying it's not, but at the moment they're very clear in emphasising it was an object.
And President Biden was accused of being weak or slow in the shooting down of a Chinese spy balloon, according to the Americans. So there are ramifications here, aren't there, both politically and in terms of relations with other countries?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's huge political pressure on President Biden. The fallout over that alleged spy balloon is still going on. Yesterday, the House of Representatives passed a non-binding resolution condemning China and accusing the Chinese Communist Party of essentially deceiving America about their claims. They maintain it was a civilian vessel for weather research. So whilst just a moment ago, the White House said that President Biden ordered for this object, that we're now being told this recent object, to be shot down out of an abundance of caution, you can't help but think maybe there is also this huge political pressure on him to take action much more quickly. I just also want to add, John Kirby was asked about the nature of US and China relations at the moment, and all he said is that he doesn't know if there has been any outreach between the US and China, between Beijing and Washington, since the balloon was shot down, which is over a week ago. So I think that's maybe a signal that relations certainly aren't very good between the two rival superpowers.
All right, Nomia, we're just going to go live now to the US Department of Defense. We think that this is being discussed now in a military briefing. Let's have a listen.
In terms of the other balloon, as I mentioned in our previous briefing, we have learned a lot about the Chinese surveillance high-altitude balloon program. We've gathered a lot of information over the last couple of years, and so we were able to, based on that information, detect at a very early stage. As it approached U.S. airspace, we had a good understanding of what it was. As I mentioned, we were able to monitor that closely, track it while it went over the continental United States, learn a lot about it, and take it down at the appropriate time.
So would you urge us to put this in a different bucket than that, or should we?
Yeah, I think I was pretty clear. This was traveling at about 40,000 feet, which posed a reasonable threat to civilian air traffic, and the decision was made to take it down. So, Dan.
When the pilots approached it, and they determined, I understand, that it was not manned. How did they determine that? And at that point, wouldn't it be possible to at least describe what they were looking at? Did it resemble a balloon or an airplane or what?
Again, we'll know more and have more information once we've recovered this. I will give credit to our pilots that they are very capable in terms of looking at an object, assessing whether or not this had the potential to be manned at that altitude, something that small. Very, very unlikely that it was manned. And so, again, no indication that it was manned, presented a potential reasonable threat to civilian air traffic, and we took it down.
What speed was it traveling at, by the way?
I don't have that information.
On the Chinese balloon, if we could go back, is it still, in the Pentagon's view, plausible or maybe even likely that it was not necessarily intentional when that balloon turned and blew eastward, that it seemed to have not, had some technical problem?
Yeah. So, Dan, what I would tell you is based on the information that we have, it was being maneuvered and purposefully driven along its track. Again, recognizing that winds do play a role because of the maneuverability of the balloon. It's our assessment that this was a purposeful mission. In terms of the Chinese motivations, again, I'd have to refer you back to China to talk about that. Ma'am, and then come to Nancy.
Thank you. Sorry, got it. We emailed you police body camera footage showing a National Guard general in Ohio pushing my colleague and having to be escorted away from him this week. We asked the Ohio National Guard for comment, but do you, as a
You're listening to Brigadier General Patrick Ryder, the Pentagon Press Secretary. At this point, we're going to say goodbye to our viewers who are listening on PBS in America and around the globe. For UK viewers, we will stay listening to this Pentagon Press briefing.
A free and independent press. So again, I'd refer you to the Ohio National Guard for any comment about that particular incident, but I can assure you that that is not acceptable behavior.
Face any kind of conduct on becoming charged under the UCMJ?
Again, I'd have to refer you to them. I'm not going to make those kind of policy comments here from the podium in terms of what they may or may not be doing to address it. It would be inappropriate for me to comment on that.
So, Nomia, Brigadier General Patrick Ryder there. A couple of interesting lines that this would be a threat to civilian air traffic. Couldn't confirm if this was manned, this object was manned or not. So interesting for them to come forward with so many details unknown.
Yeah, they've been really they've been open about it, but they've been also very vague about it as well. So one thing that they're very much emphasising is that this was not a balloon at all. Well, we don't know that for sure, but they are saying at the moment that it wasn't a balloon, it was an object. But of course, people want to know more of the details, exactly, what was it? What have they found so far? Because they have said that there has been significant debris gathered so far because it fell on frozen water. But at the moment, they're being vague about it, not giving too many details. But we do expect them perhaps to give more. We're still waiting to hear more details yet about the actual balloon from last week, which the Americans are very clear what that was. They maintain that was a spy balloon from China, but on this particular object, no concrete details yet of what it is.
And Nomi, just to go back to that, incident with China, there was a long planned trip, wasn't there, from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to go to China. And there's obviously much to discuss at the moment. So do you think this has been seen by the White House as an issue of national security?
I think partly, but also this is about them standing up to China. If we look at, what President Biden said in his State of the Union address earlier this week, Antony Blinken cancelling his trip was actually criticised by a lot of Republicans who felt that not only should have Biden's administration act quickly and shot the balloon down, but they should have still gone to that meeting with Beijing and confronted them about it. Now, we don't know if and when the Blinken will resume that trip. I mentioned earlier, we don't know for sure if China and the US have spoken since that balloon was shot down. We understand there was an attempt by the Defense Secretary, the US Defense Secretary, to have a phone conversation with China about that spy balloon, but China rebuffed any attempt at that and has called the US irresponsible for what it did and accused America of not creating a proper atmosphere to have a constructive dialogue.